said that Trump was presented Israel's plan to actually take out the Ayatollah, but Trump vetoed that plan. In other words, Israel wanted to just end this today by taking out the head Ayatollah, the guy over there, and Trump, who may or may not have had attempts on his life from this country and its regime, said, we don't want to go that far.
Fred, what do you? Let me just ask you two guys. What do you guys think about the U.S. taking out heads of state? I think that's a really bad precedent. You let the Iranian people take Khamenei out and the mullahs overthrow them. But what do you guys think?
I think it would be a mistake. And I think anytime Israel wants to do it, they can.
Yeah.
I think what Israel's hoping for is that the Iranian people, as we were discussing earlier, are going to take this current attack by Israel against the Iranian leadership. They will take that as a mark of encouragement to carry out regime change, that they will rise up, the Iranian people will rise up and end this.
And maybe the military helps out in that.
However, I don't think there is any hesitation on President Trump's part to help Israel carry that out. That is why we have moved our forces in much closer. We're going to be there. We're already helping on the defensive side of things.
Yeah.
And we are there if the Iranians touch any American base in that region.
Trump's already said.
Yes.
You're gonna find out.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think they would be ready to take the regime out very quickly.
Yeah. I would say it's also not wise for Trump to sign off on something like that. Let the guy, let his people take care of that.
A quick thumbs up or thumbs down, Chris, on targeting Khamenei.
I would not him directly. Don't sign off on that as the U.S. president.
Yeah. All right, folks. Tons of stuff to come. We will be talking about here in the next segment the suspected Minnesota shooter and what happened in that state. Other stuff going on. Obviously, we still have mostly peaceful protests in Los Angeles. I'm just kidding. All kinds of things coming. We're going to take a short break, though. We hope you will return to today's issues. You're listening to the American Family Radio Network. We will be right back.
It's my turn.
Here is your host for My Turn, Don Wildman.
The Bible contains the story of David and Bathsheba. Bathsheba was a very beautiful wife of Uriah, a soldier in David's army. David's desire for Bathsheba was so great that David arranged for Uriah to be in the front charge of the next battle, where the chance of his death would be great. Well, after Uriah died fighting for David, David took Bathsheba to be his wife. When David's preacher Nathan confronted him with this evil deed, David longed for forgiveness. You will find in Psalm 51 David's cry for forgiveness. What is forgiveness? What is this thing David longed for? Well, forgiveness is a cleansing of the soul. Create a pure heart in me, God, was David's plea. Forgiveness is a clean heart. It was the prophet Isaiah who said, though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they are red like crimson, they shall become as wool. Forgiveness is becoming clean in our heart. William Cooper, the English poet, expressed quite beautifully what forgiveness is. These are the words he penned. There is a fountain filled with blood, drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunged beneath the flood lose all their guilty stains. Now the next question is this: how can one receive forgiveness? The answer is basically quite simple. First, one must forgive those who have wronged him. This is necessary to get his heart conditioned for forgiveness. Then, all that is necessary to receive forgiveness is to ask for it. Now, it may seem strange that the prerequisite for forgiveness to be received is that forgiveness must be given, but such is the case. Jesus taught, "For if you forgive others the wrongs they have done you, your Father in heaven will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive the wrongs of others, then your Father will not forgive the wrongs you have done." The best way one can get even with another who has wronged him is to forgive. Forgiveness may seem a strange way to get even, but if you doubt the wisdom of the statement, then try it. There isn't enough room in your heart for both revenge and love. One of them will have to go. Give love a chance and it will drive revenge out. Several years after his affair with Bathsheba, David was seriously wronged by his son Absalom. But David was quick to forgive his son. Perhaps the reason that David forgave Absalom so quickly was that he had already experienced God's forgiveness. You know, guilt can weigh heavy on a person's heart. It can cause him no end of anxiety and worry. It can severely tax the physical health of the human body. But the good news is that there is a release for guilt. There is a place where we can deposit our guilt and leave it. And that place is with God. If you want forgiveness, first of all, forgive those who have wronged you. Then ask for God's forgiveness in a sincere way, and forgiveness is yours. Just remember that the only sin for which you cannot find forgiveness is the sin which you fail to ask forgiveness for.
This has been My Turn with Don Wildman, a production of the American Family Association.
We give thanks to God always for all of you, constantly mentioning you in our prayers, remembering for our God and Father your work of faith and labor of love and steadfastness of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. 1 Thessalonians 1:3.
American Family Radio. This is today's issues. Email your comments to comments@afr.net. Past broadcasts of today's issues are available for listening and viewing in the archive at afr.net. Now, back to more of today's issues.
And welcome back to today's issues. It's Ed Vitagliano sitting in for Tim Wildman this week. By the way, folks, I forgot to tell you, in case you didn't know, it is June 16th, and we are now more than halfway through the month of June. Crazy, fast year.
This weekend will be the official start of summer.
That's right.
Yep.
Although here in Mississippi, where our flagship station is for our network, it seems pretty clear that summer's already begun. But we've had a lot of rain, but a very rainy spring. So I guess I shouldn't complain. The temperatures have been moderate
So far.
But when summer hits and gets up into the upper 90s, it's pretty miserable here. Anyway, I will proceed to complain about that at some point when that all starts to unfold. All right, Chris, what's next?
Well, this could very well have been the lead story had we not had the war between Israel and Iran that we spent the first 30 minutes talking about. If you didn't hear that, listen to the podcast later today, which will be available on afr.net. The other story that we need to get into that's still getting national attention, I just saw all the 4 networks and our television here reporting on this. The man suspected of killing a Minnesota lawmaker and wounding another crawled to officers in surrender on Sunday after they located him in the woods near his home in Minnesota, ending a massive, nearly 2-day search that put the entire state on edge. Vance Belter was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder. He's accused of posing as a police officer and fatally shooting former Democratic House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark in their home early Saturday in the northern Minneapolis suburbs. Details are still coming in, but this is a very bizarre situation that we are following at afn.net.
And by the way, that story is at American Family News, afn.net. Encourage you to go over there and check it out. Lots of great stories and insights on what's happening. This individual, Vance Belter, also allegedly shot Senator John Hoffman, a Democrat, and his wife Yvette, and they were about 9 miles away, and they have thus far survived, right? I think
That is correct.
I think that Senator Hoffman was in surgeries. I think even over into the evening on the night of the shooting, but the wife was giving reports on it. All right, Fred, what do we know about that? Again, this is alleged shooter Vance Belter, but the law enforcement is making it sound very much like he's the guy. In fact, Democratic Governor Tim Walz said one man's unthinkable actions, so everything seems to be pointing to Belter, but we'll have to wait and see for the official reports on that, and probably the trial, and whether or not he's confessed to it. What do we know about this situation, the circumstance of the shooting? I doubt there's a manifesto, but everyone who goes out and does these kinds of things here the last 5 years seems to have written a manifesto. Do we have any of that kind of information?
Not really. Let me read you a little bit from the Wall Street Journal coverage of this morning. Belter had built a scattered career that included food companies, retailing, and pastoring, according to public records and his online posts.
You mean pastoring a church kind of thing?
Pastoring a church.
Okay.
All right. He has been living with his wife in a rural area outside of the Twin Cities and staying a few nights a week at a rental home in a working class Minneapolis neighborhood with a couple of roommates. They talked to one of those roommates in the wake of identifying him as the suspect in these shootings. And this roommate supposedly told authorities that Belter had contacted him and said, "I might not see you again." This in advance of the shootings on, I guess it was late Friday night, early Saturday morning. And so it's also on the weekend, somebody sent me a video where Belter is identified as preaching a sermon in the Congo. And he was with some kind of group, missions group in the Congo. He's also, according to records, been an advocate, a pro-life advocate. So we had a discussion about this in our story meeting this morning, and we want to warn our listeners. When this starts to come out and is being reported broadly, they're going to try to make a connection that would lead you to believe, here's another pro-life person so radicalized that they're willing to go out and kill Democrats. All right, this is the way the story is going to be framed. There are some reports already describing him as an evangelical Christian.
Right.
All right. So be careful of that. If it is true that he was very involved in the pro-life community, the question should be asked as Christians: how could somebody who speaks out against the taking of unborn life go and do this if he's guilty of this? So it's beware of this. I think the only thing that is keeping this off the front pages at the moment is the war that's going on between Israel and Iran. There were a couple of other big events on the weekend, the No Kings demonstrations, the military parade in Washington. But the media now will get back into this. So just beware. They will try to paint this guy as representing radical, those right-wing Christians or a pro-life person. If he is guilty of this, he should be tried to the fullest extent of the law. What he did was, allegedly, we'll keep saying that, and is a suspect at 2:30 in the morning, he puts a mask on and walks up to the door of Melissa Hortman and shoots she and her husband point blank, and then proceeds to try to do the same with this other couple, Senator John Hoffman, 60, and his wife, Yvette. Listen, if he's guilty of this, try them to the full extent of the law. I think in Minnesota, it's 40 years is the maximum.
For each
yes,
felony count.
That's, and I think our audience is savvy enough. Don't buy into this idea that, you know, he represents the radical pro-life movement at all. No, this is wrong. If he's guilty of this,
premeditated, cold-blooded murder.
That's what it is.
If he did it,
yes.
Somebody did it.
Yes,
somebody did this and premeditated. And I say premeditated because the Ring camera or whatever security camera caught him at the Hortmans. He had on this mask. That's premeditation.
And also a police uniform.
Yes.
And a car that looked like a police vehicle.
Yeah. So if Belter is the person who did this, and if he either is or claims to be a Christian, that does not. Christians are not to commit cold-blooded, premeditated murder. You're to allow politics to play as it needs to, and you let the government bear the sword. That's what Paul says in Romans 13. I would also like to just say, and then Chris, let you chime in here. I would also like to say it's unfair and slanderous, in my opinion, for either side to paint with a broad brush and say this person or that person did X, Y, or Z. Therefore, everyone who is identified as the same, whether it be, I don't care if it's LGBTQ, or if they're Christian, or if they're Muslim. We have to be very careful about painting with too broad a brush, but we're going to see it. Yes. And both sides should avoid doing that. Christians especially, because we're not allowed to lie or slander. So if I say Bob over here is a Democrat, therefore he is a murderer and he is a this and he is a that, I am slandering someone and this is a sin. So I think we should make the case that evil is real and evil can exist in any political camp or any ideological camp or any faith.
Yeah, to your point about one person kind of being the bad apple for the whole bunch here, there were people, like, for example, when Congressman Steve Scalise was shot by the guy who appeared to have been a Bernie Sanders supporter, excuse me. People came to Bernie Sanders' defense and said, that doesn't mean everybody that votes for or supports Bernie Sanders is crazy. So, I mean, there have been, it needs to be said. It shouldn't need to be said. But
now let me also say that the left, a segment of the left, appears to be getting increasingly radicalized. I think we can say that without saying every Democrat is a radical. But when we see Antifa and we see the kind of violence that has been going on in Los Angeles and, you know, the summer of love, quote unquote, in 2020, I think we can say that elements of the political left are increasingly radicalized and prone to solving political problems through violence. We have polling that indicates that growing numbers of self-identified Democrats think that assassinating Trump is a valid way of getting him out of office. So I don't want to also take the truth out of the discussion, but we should be careful as Christians to not do what the media is soon going to do if Vance Belter turns out to be a pastor and evangelical Christian, etc.
Talking about the violence there from the left, the LA riots is still a story in the news. It's going to be kind of bumped to maybe the second segment of any newscast today on the television because of things like Israel and Iran and this Minnesota shooting. I want to bring in something involving the LA riots here for just a second because Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal in which he called for service members, troops, to be brought in to mitigate the LA riots. Some Democrats and news personalities don't like that. Rusty Pugh has been on top of this story for us today on AFN, and he's aired a couple of sound bites, one from Cotton and somebody in response here. Let's begin with Arkansas Senator Tim Cotton being pressed about his op-ed calling for troops to be brought in to mitigate the LA riots. Clip 7.
You referred to it as the threat from the radical left. Given the amount of tension in the country right now, is that really the language to use?
Yes, when you see left-wing street militias who are throwing bricks and frozen water bottles at police officers and shooting them with fireworks.
LAPD says they were handling when things turned violent yesterday.
The LA police chief said last weekend that his forces were overwhelmed and they couldn't manage the situation.
Now, somebody that was brought on to Fox to respond to this was their frequent contributor, Joe Concha, who thought Cotton handled this perfectly. Clip 8.
I mean, well, let's be clear that Margaret Brennan is arguably the most terribly biased interviewer on broadcast news, if you want to call CBS News even news these days. I mean, dozens of businesses have been looted, vandalized in Los Angeles. We've all seen it over the last 2 weeks. Rioters have tried to murder LAPD officers by dropping large blocks of concrete on their cars from overpasses, which obviously could potentially kill them. And Tom Cotton handled that perfectly. No emotion, completely confident, and the guy was spitting facts. The fact is that we have so many in the media that continue to insist that riots are not happening when our eyes, our ears see the video.
You know, given the fact that American taxpayers are going to be on the hook for helping repair LA, it's not a bad idea to send in service members to put a stop to this.
Well, Fred, I have no... I think your first line of defense should always be local police, county law enforcement, then you call in the state troopers. But there's nothing wrong with having the National Guard on high alert, ready to be deployed if law enforcement is overwhelmed. I'm not sure, and all presidents have done this. If something happens in terms of a city looking like it might get out of control, well, actually, the Biden administration sometimes hesitated to, but I understand what Senator Cotton is saying, and I also understand that I don't like seeing the military deployed in these kinds of circumstances unless it's your only option, because they're not really trained to be law enforcement.
Yes.
And you put them in a very difficult situation if things turn utterly violent. But sometimes that's the only card you have left to play.
Let's remember how all of this started. We know since President Trump took office once again, and during the election campaign, he said he would make it a priority to bring security back to our borders, to go after people who have entered this country illegally, particularly those who have committed violent crimes. That's just factual.
Right.
So, last week, ICE officials were carrying out some of these raids. Now, the first reports were ICE officials went into a Home Depot in the Los Angeles. That's not true. They gathered near a Home Depot where they knew some illegal immigrants were going to be. I've seen it over the years in California where folks who are in the country illegally kind of stand around because they're hoping to get part-time jobs.
Yeah, trying to get work.
Construction.
Trucks come by and
that kind of thing. So that's what they were up to. However, what happened was that the ICE agents were being encountered by people opposed to what they were doing. So Governor Newsom wasn't going to call in the National Guard, but President Trump did. He assigned them to go in to protect these quite legal raids.
And ICE facilities.
And ICE facilities. There were federal buildings that were coming under attack by these protesters. So that's why the National Guard was called in. I think the conversation intensified a bit when the idea of Marines going in on the street. And they actually stayed outside for the longest time, and they were only going to protect the buildings. In other words, stand in front of federal buildings. So we're going to see this kind of thing over and over again. You had the radical left that's going to be out there. You had the No Kings March this weekend. I mean, which was well organized and well funded.
Yes.
Now it kind of took second place as far as media treatment because, again, of what happened in the Middle East. But they were out there. It was well planned. Even in our local hometown here, there was a little demonstration outside a Republican congressman's office. I happened to drive by because I was curious.
Right.
And they had signs, Trump is a racist, some other things like that, you know.
But that was a peaceful protest.
It was a
no cars burned. No police officers assaulted.
There was an incident in Utah, I think, and a couple of the other Chicago, I think there was a couple of incidents, that kind of thing. But, you know, it comes down to this. We have roughly 15 to 20 million people who entered this country illegally under Joe Biden. Trump says we have to deal with this.
Right.
As simple as that. We have to round these people up. We either have to encourage them to leave on their own,
self-deport,
or we have to deport them. That's the bottom line. Now, the other development on this front on the weekend was that apparently President Trump is having second thoughts about deporting those people who have entered this country illegally many years ago who are working on farms.
Right.
Or perhaps, you know, some kind of production plants of some type. So that's kind of interesting, and we can get into that if you like.
I do have a quote from the president here about that.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go for it.
All right, so this is coming from a Daily Mail story attributing information to the New York Times and something Trump posted on Truth Social last Thursday. For those that are not aware of it, the Trump administration has for the first time pumped the brakes on its mass deportation agenda, telling ICE officials to pause raids on farms, hotels, and restaurants, according to an internal email and 3 U.S. officials familiar with the situation. On his Truth Social post, Trump said, quote, "Our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good, longtime workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace. That has led people to believe that Trump is backing away from his, we're going to get rid of illegal immigrants push."
Well, Fred, the immigration system in this country has been broken for decades.
Yes.
Going all the way back to President Reagan, who signed an amnesty bill to legalize those who were in the country, who were here, had immigrated illegally. I think at some point you are going to see, I don't know what people think about this in terms of